All right, so welcome to today's webinar on unlocking potential, an integrative and functional medicine approach to autism. Let me just share with you that what I'm sharing with you today is information. It doesn't replace, obviously, a relationship with a one-on-one health professional, and it shouldn't be considered health or medical advice. I don't know your child and all of their health history. What I'm going to do is share with you a bit of a different perspective and some research which you may or may not be aware of. And what I will say is you'll see I put a lot of effort into my webinars. So the unauthorised reproduction or distribution of copyright work is illegal. And all the materials belong to myself, the Healthy Gut Nutritionist. Today, I'm going to introduce what's called the Integrative and Functional Medicine Nutrition Approach or model for supporting people with autism. And as we go along, I'm going to share stories. All the short stories I'm sharing today are children, because that's largely where I've been working with people with autism, but they would relate to adults as well. So this is me. I'm a university qualified integrative and functional medicine nutritionist. So what does that mean? It means I've got a master's of integrative health. I've got an advanced diploma of nutrition. I've also got bachelor degrees in business and things like that. But what I really specialise of late is gut health, pediatrics, autoimmune disease, nutrigenomics, skin conditions, and of late mold illness as well. I'm a professional member of what's called the Functional Genomics Institute, and I'm also a member of the Institute of Functional Medicine. I've just finished their training program. I've supported hundreds of people around the world in regaining their gut health and overall health. And like I said, since about August last year, I've really delved deep into supporting children with autism and ADHD. So, rethinking autism. When I work with parents, I find that they're saying that the people that they're seeing are thinking that they're dealing with their children not as a whole person. So, they've not had anyone ask them the story right back to pregnancy, birth, what's happened in their life, and joining the dots. And that's where I get a lot of information is by understanding not only your child's life and their health history, but also the family history. What I find is there's often these co-occurring conditions. So things going on with their digestion, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, often their immune health. A lot of children also have skin conditions and other neurological things going on. And what I've learned is that individual care is absolutely critical, along with integrating traditional health, but also integrative and functional medicine. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. So, integrative and functional medicine, basically, what we think about when we say these words is that if you think about your child almost like a tree, so the roots of their tree are things like sleep and nutrition and things like their relationships. And what we often think about when we think about autism, which is obviously a very complex spectrum, is the symptoms. And what we want to be able to do is reduce symptom severity, improve their health, and improve their quality of life. And so when we work on these roots, often we find that the tree itself, the person, the child, thrives. And how I do that is I work with parents on addressing what we call the non-negotiables in their food and their lifestyle choices. So, what does that mean? That means taking out a lot of processed and fast foods. I know it's very difficult and I don't want to lose you right now, but that's something that I specialise in helping parents, particularly those who are very fussy eaters, because sometimes trying to get them to eat lots of fruits and veggies, as I've got my diagram up here, is is really difficult. And most of the parents that I work with have already seen a whole lot of dietitians and other health professionals. And so offering the child food, going shopping, doing all the things, getting them involved with cooking, has not helped. So sometimes, a lot of the time I'd like to start at option one, but sometimes we can't. Sometimes we've got to go a bit below the surface to say what's going on with their body and how do we support them. Because when we think about nutrition, it's not just what we intake, it's not just what we eat, but it's also that absorption. So, for a lot of the children that I work with, they have had issues with reflux and they've been on PPIs for many years. They've also often had a lot of antibiotics and a lot of other medical interventions, which impacts absorption. So, sometimes that's where we start. And other times it is actually stopping to say, look, what are some of the other areas? So looking here at the roots that we could get some wins with. So is it, how do we make some upgrades with nutrition? Is it sleep? Is it relaxation? Is it their physical activity and exercise? What about their stresses and trauma and relationships with people? Sometimes we've got to delve into the genetics, and I'm going to talk quite a bit today about nutrigenomics, and then gut health, biochemistry, hormones. Basically, we don't leave a stone unturned. If I'm working with a parent and they want to keep digging and investigating, we just keep going until we get to a point where, like I said, that symptom severity reduces, because at the end of the day, you and I want your child to be happy and thriving and have a good quality of life. So, areas to investigate. So, when you're looking at research, if you're not trained in research, if you are looking up research on autism for your child, there's different levels. So in the literature, there's what we call systematic reviews, and that's where people have looked at all the studies that have been done and have summarized it. So that's a really good level of research to investigate, and that's often where I start. Then we've got different levels where we've got like randomized control trials where they've said, look, those 5 children do this and those 5 children do that. And what was the difference? We don't often do that with children, pediatrics, because of ethics. What we often find with research articles are they are cohort studies or case reports where people like myself say, look, I observed in my clinic, I did X, Y, Z, and this is what we've found. And then you may also find expert opinions. So I'm just sharing this with you now because I am trained scientifically in my master's. I'm always thinking of providing you with really good levels of research. So look, the gut-brain connection, you've probably heard of it. And definitely what some of the systematic reviews and other studies are showing is that there is most certainly a link. So this article basically, you can Google it, it's open access, you can read it. Basically compared children who had been diagnosed with autism, and what they found was that they had extra bacteria which were opportunistic and nasty, and then had lack of other good bacteria. So they looked at 18 studies, a total of 493 children, and they compared the 493 children who had been diagnosed with autism with 403 children who had not. And that's how they were able to compare the gut microbiome of those two categories of two cohorts. So what am I finding? I'm finding that I would say majority of the children that I see are constipated. Often the parents don't know because, especially when they're older, they're of an age where they're not saying anything. I have had some children where they're defecating once a week or once every 10 days to 14 days. And that is not great. If your child is not passing a bowel movement every day, then the toxins are basically having to go through the liver twice again um, to be deconjugated. So we've got to make sure that they're not constipated, that they're passing bowel movements, that they're able to get rid of that toxic load every day. I do see some children who do have diarrhea and also who have a mixed combination of constipation and diarrhea. And what that can mean is that they're losing their nutrients too quick. So it doesn't matter how good their nutrition is, if they've got constant diarrhea, then they're losing their minerals and vitamins, and it's not great. So we've got to work out why both of these things are happening. Dysbiosis means where there's an overgrowth of bacteria, and that's what this research showed, that the children with autism have often a overgrowth of pathogenic gut bacteria and also a deficient dysbiosis. And when I say deficient, I mean good bacteria. So in our gut, we've got a mix of both, and we want to have these really good keystone bacteria that are protective for our health. So when they're missing, it's not great. What I also find is, and there is research supporting this as well, is yeast overgrowth and candida overgrowth. And so, how that can often manifest is that because the children, and I'll show you some testing results in a minute, but because they've got this significant overgrowth in their body, they are craving refined carbohydrates. They're craving breads and cakes and biscuits and all the white things and also sugar. And it's really, really difficult to get them to eat anything else because they've got this yeast, which is actually craving those foods. And the other thing is, you may have heard of leaky gut. So the medical term is intestinal permeability, which I'll talk you through the diagram in a minute. Actually, I'll talk you through the diagram now, where the lining of the gut is one cell thick. So it's not very big, the lining of the gut. So when we've got a good, healthy gut, kids are putting their hands in their mouth, they're licking things, they're eating things that, have fallen on the floor. They're all going into the system. So if you think of their gut like a donut, the inside of the gut is the inside of the donut, and the outside of the donut is, their skin and the outside of their body. So what happens when there's symbiosis? It means, look, the gut barrier is protecting them because under that gut lining sits 80%, we think, of the immune system. When we have dysbiosis, so that's where we could have, where they've had food poisoning or lots of antibiotics or, like I said, proton pump inhibitors if they had reflux. It could be genetic, it could be due to a lot of fast food and processed food, then they can end up with that lining of the gut. And it's called the secretory IgA. The mucus on top becomes worn down. And then what that leads to, you can see this purple here, where there's an increase in zonulin, which is a protein between each of the gut linings. These little black marks here, I think, are meant to represent zonulin. And then what happens is antigens that are in the gut that, are meant to stay there and basically meant to be pooed out, get into the bloodstream. And when they're in the bloodstream, the body does what it's meant to do. It basically tags these things and goes in and upregulates their immune response to fight these pathogens. So the issue we have when we've got children who do have an overgrowth of nasty bacteria and not enough good bacteria that's protecting them, and then they're eating a whole bunch of sugar and processed and fast foods, is that we end up with this intestinal permeability. So if in doubt, when I'm faced with a child, I will always start with the gut. And I want to share this success story of John. So, Mum was seeing a naturopath who specialises in autism. This is before I started working directly with children with autism. So, this was I'd say probably about a year ago, beginning of 2024. And she came to me because she knew I was working in nutrigenomics. So this naturopath had done so much stuff and tried so many things with this child, which had, shifted the dial a little bit. What we ended up doing, oh no, sorry, John. John was the story of the gut. This naturopath had run a gut test. And so this lady came to me and said, look, I want your opinion on the gut test. And as it turned out, it was significant. He had very deficient good bugs and significant overgrowth of bad bugs. He was constipated. He wasn't pooing probably he was going to the toilet, I think, twice a week, covered in eczema, and these extreme meltdowns would bite and hit, and both to parents, but also siblings and grandparents. And so we worked on the gut, and it went away. So he was able to better regulate himself. And I think it's because that neural inflammation from this, once we healed the gut, the immune system was able to calm down. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating story. And this is a test we did as a follow-up for him, not his test. This is not his, this is a sample. But when you do a poo test for your child, you just capture it at home in the privacy of your home, you send it off to the lab. And what it does is it comes back to say, look, if anything on that front page comes up, it's big. Like we've got to be able to deal with these pathogens. These are the good bacteria I was talking about. So a lot of the children, when I look at their guts, they're actually missing some of these really important keystone bacteria. And then the other thing is we often find this overgrowth section is often gone crazy for a lot of the children. And that's what that research paper indicated. It picked on a few of these that they found in their study that for the children with autism, they had overgrowth in some of these areas. It also, this test looks at things like the zonulin. So does your child have leaky gut? Is there other inflammation things going on in their gut? And what we do with this is we can then work through, okay, where do we start? If we're going to start working on their gut health, where is a good place? We don't always need this. I can use my brain and work with you to say, right, what do we do? But if you're stuck, investing in a gut test can be really helpful. And on my YouTube channel, there is another test on the benefits of the GI map if you want to know more. But you can always message me as well. Environmental toxins and autism. So this was a great systematic review. Again, it's open on the internet, so you can read it. And what it does is it talks about not only toxins that we're all exposed to, but because children do not have a sophisticated detox pathway and their liver doesn't function the same way as an adult, and often genetics are at play, they end up absolutely full of these toxins. The big one's glyphosate that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And glyphosate is basically Roundup. So if you spray your garden with Roundup, if you live in the country and the property's being sprayed with Roundup, if you're eating produce that's heavily sprayed with Roundup, then the chances are, if you've got a child with autism, I would suggest they've probably got a reasonable level of glyphosate in their body. Heavy metals is another one, other environmental exposures. So if you vape or your child's around someone who vapes, it doesn't matter that the clothes don't smell. It is still on your skin and on your clothes. And for a little body who cannot deal with those significant toxins, they absorb it. And they absorb it not only through smelling it, but transdermal. So that's what I have a lot of parents say, oh no, but I'm outside or I'm standing halfway down the street. It doesn't matter. If their skin then touches your skin or touches your clothes, they're going to absorb it through their skin. Smoking, is obviously another one. If you're exposed to a lot of bushfire, think about, I live in Canberra where it's very cold, um, and there's fireplaces. That's another very significant environmental exposure. There is nothing good about a fireplace in a home for health. So if if you need more on that, you can Google that and research that. Um, but especially for a child who's already got a lot going on. Mold. So mold, if you've seen it, if you've smelt it, then it's in your body. Basically, I had a child the other day, 3 kids, and I did a particular test on all of them, which I'm going to take you through in a minute. It's called an organic acid urine test. Two of the younger kids, fine. They looked, things that we need to do. The older child, some of the markers for mold were through the roof. And I rang the lab because I said, look, is this an error? I did all 3 kids and 2 are fine. One's, got huge values. And they said, yep, no, we ran our quality assurance. We ran it through a couple of times. This is the results. Talked to the child, and he's a teenager. And he was like, yeah, in my classroom last year, it stunk. It absolutely stunk of mildew, musty. And he'd not thought to tell anyone because everyone was just complaining and it was just what it was. And it's full on in his body. And it's going to take us 1 to 2 years to get it out. So I just keep that in mind that, if you see it and you smell it, you ingest it. The other type of mold is invisible. So aspergillus, often you can't smell. And so if you've had water come in your ceiling, as an example, and you've got a wet patch or like a water stain, but it doesn't smell, a lot of people say, oh, no, it's fine. I just paint over it. Well, actually, if you were to test the air in that room, you'd probably find there's a high spore count. Now, where it becomes challenged is if children are also breathing through their mouth, they're not breathing through their nose, and like I said, their liver isn't as fully developed. I want to share with you this story of a little girl, Sarah. So no one had asked her parents the big questions. So, we went right back to birth, pregnancy, birth, asked all the questions. And then my famous last question, have you ever been exposed to mold or has your child? And she said, yes, for her whole first year, we lived in a unit that had black mold. Unbelievable. I was like, oh my goodness, the last question I ask, and there's so much data right there. So we've been working very gently on supporting this little girl. And guess what? She's now going to school. She's socializing with all the other kids. Mum can't believe how just engaging she is, and she's having a great time. She can write her name now. And also, she said, I love you. And she's really cuddly and very, what would I say, lovable to her whole family. So her extended family is saying, oh my God, what's happened? This is like a new child. And where she was, it was literally her brain was on fire. She had what's called a really high level of quinolinic acid on one of her tests, and which is neural inflammation, and we've been able to calm that all the way down. And it's unbelievable. It really is. It's such an honor to be able to help these parents and these children. Glyphosate. So, like I said, that's the Roundup, that's the spray. What this study did was it plotted glyphosate use on things like corn and soy, and they've mapped it to the incidence of autism diagnosis from the age 6 to 21. And you can see it's pretty much correlated. So there is a lot of research that's been undertaken in the US at the moment on autism and root causes of autism. So I'm sure we're going to hear more in the coming years around some of this research. How you test it, it's a wee. So, this is probably one of the most simple tests that I run. It's just a very simple wee. You send it off, and what it comes back is to say, what's going on for this kid. And as you can see for this one, they are absolutely through the roof, got glyphosate in their body, which is just not great. It's linked in a lot of science with a lot of chronic health problems. It inhibits something called tryptophan. You need tryptophan to make serotonin. Serotonin's the hormone that makes us feel happy. And you need serotonin to make melatonin. So if we're eating plants that don't have enough tryptophan, phenylalanine, or tyrosine because the glyphosate has inhibited that, then as a result, we can also become deficient in those amino acids. It also, glyphosate kills good bacteria in the gut. And so when we got that, like I said, in a lot of kids that I see, their guts, they're missing some really good critical bacteria, then what happens is the overgrowth bacteria can proliferate. So it's not great. Another way to look at toxins is the hair tissue mineral analysis. So what this can do, if I can zoom in a bit, is look at heavy metals. So for a lot of children, when I run this, they will have high levels of, particularly, I'm seeing mercury, lead, aluminium, and even things like arsenic in their body. Sometimes I don't see big numbers on the first test because their detox pathways are not optimal. So because they're basically just storing all of this up, we're not able to see it in the hair. And I should say that hair is made up. How it works is you've got cells, cells make tissue, tissue make organs, and basically this is a tissue. So if you cut a couple of centimeters close to the scalp, we get a date stamp of 1 to 2 months of what's been stored in tissue, which, if you correlate it, you could say what's been stored in organs as well. So, like I said, sometimes we do some gentle detox work first, and then we do the hair tissue mineral analysis later, because we find if we run it too soon, sometimes there's not much to report, but as soon as we start supporting their detox, bang, they go through the roof, which, is what you want to get it out before it then drops back again. And I'll talk more about this test in a moment when I talk about nutrition. This Tox Detect profile, so this is a urine test. And I'll be honest, I ran this a lot for children when I first started working with children with autism last year. I have slowed down a bit, and I'll tell you why, because it is always so significant. So, and all these tests cost money. So what I find with this test is usually I have not had a test come back, except for one of my kids, where it hasn't been pages and pages and pages of toxins. So what I say to parents is, look, you can run it. We can see what's in there, but at the end of the day, we've got to work on how we support their overall detox capacity. So if it comes back to we've only got so much finances to spend, then, we'll probably do this later. But I do have some parents who just say, I want to do it all. If you want to do it all, we can do it all. But like I said, it always comes back with a hell of a lot of results, which basically what it points to is, like I said, that inability to basically clear what's in their environment. Look, it is helpful to say, look, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with fire retardants on pajamas and furniture and sprays on carpets and lounges? Is it plastics? So in that regard, it can help us get a bit more specific on what's in their body, but often, like I said, we do this a little bit later. Mold, look, I would say if you've seen it and you've smelt it, it's neurotoxic, can cause oxidative stress, immunotoxic, hepatotoxic, carcinogenic. So what that means is it's known to cause cancer, nephrotoxic, so impacts the kidneys. If your child's wetting the bed or they're urinating a lot, can impact the gut, GI toxicity, and can impact reproductive health. Um, so again, it's a urine test, and what it does is it comes back with all these numbers. If you've got a high level of mycophenolic acid, MPA, it means it's in their environment. So either it's at school or it's at home or it's in the drink bottles or it's in the fridge or the washing machine or the air conditioner. It's somewhere. So how you treat all of these different molds is different. And like I said, it can take years. So again, if we suspect it and we're trying to work out priority, often this will not be the first priority, but we'll have it in our back of our head and be working towards it. That little girl that I spoke of earlier, we didn't do this test. We knew she had been living in mold for 1 year as a baby. We have not done this test for her yet. We've been working gently on a whole lot of things for her gut and her immune system, and she's had great results. So I don't want you to think you have to do all of these things, but it's giving you hopefully information that you didn't know was possible. And I do have a whole webinar on mold, so you can watch that if you need more information. So nutrition and mineral deficiencies, look, most certainly what you eat, you become. You make cells. So you're regenerating yourself all the time through food. I quite liked this article because it's got a bit of a link with nutrigenomics and genetics. And at the end of the day, if your child is picky, then their intake of, healthy fats, fiber, as far as, seeds and nuts and fruit and veggies and whole grains and protein may be limited. So what we've got to try and work through is, could that be because of other things that are going on in their body? Or is it quite simply we need to do more exposure therapy and trying new foods and the conversation around food? They're very different. They can be done together, but it depends where you're at. So if you've done a whole lot of stuff trying to get them to eat new foods and it's just not working, well, maybe we're missing something. Absorption and assimilation and how they use their nutrients is also really important. Nutrient and mineral deficiencies, there is ways that we can look at that are non-invasive, that are not blood tests, that I'll talk you through in a minute. And look, I want to share with you a story about beautiful little boy, Michael, who we had got no test results back yet. So what we ended up doing was, in the first consultation, he would lose it every day if he didn't get KFC, Mum told me. And so she was trying to work through how she made like a similar type of KFC at home for him. He would eat very little of other foods. And so basically, she had tried. She'd tried and offered and done all the things. And what we ended up doing was working through a really deliberate multivitamin for this boy because he was clearly very mineral and nutrient deficient. And the next appointment, I got his organic acid urine test. So I was really excited to go through the results with them. But I tell you what, I almost fell off my chair when Mum was like, wow, coming to this appointment, I was rush, rush, rush. I'd said to him, look, you can have pizza if you want. And he had said no and had a bit of a little tantrum, I suppose. He wanted the pre-mixed salad from the supermarket. So she's like, sorry, I'm a bit late. I had to go to the supermarket to get the pre-mixed salad because he just didn't want the pizza. And so what had happened in that previous 6 weeks is we had boosted him with this really deliberate, it's an excellent multi that I use for children with autism, and it was appropriate for this in this case. And because we had built the scaffolding in his body in regards to his minerals and nutrients, his taste changed. And so she told me every day for about the last 2 or 3 weeks, he'd been saying every day he wanted one of those salads. Are they the best? No, they're not the best, but it's better than not eating a salad, right? And it's a bit expensive when you're having to buy these salad kits every day, but he had made that choice and that's what he wanted to do. And his health is going to be so much better off as a result. I was absolutely floored. Never ceases to amaze me what stories I hear. So coming back to the hair test, looking at minerals for the kids is often really important. So blood tests are not always achievable, particularly for some of our kids. And so what we're looking at with some of these is I'm looking at particular markers. So basically calcium and magnesium we want in balance because one's constricting and one's relaxing. And we want them to be in balance with sodium and potassium. So we basically want them all to be in the middle. Copper and zinc we want in balance. So when copper's through the roof like this, then often we see mental health instability. And when zinc is not as high, what we find is that there's often issues with gut, with healing, and definitely with mood. So, that can be excellent in itself to find out. We find things like iron, molybdenum, and sulfur give us an idea of detox, and cobalt is the center of B12. So that gives us another clue around their B12. So again, if you're looking for options that's not a blood test, this can give you quite a lot of information just with some hair. The organic acid test, look, this is typically where I start. I would say 95% of parents, when I'm working with them, I offer them this in the first instance. And I'll tell you why. Because it gives me a good idea. I'm wondering, can I roll in and out and make this bigger for you? No, hold on. Here we go. Um, Gives me a good idea of this yeast and fungal. And on this first page, I really want to know, what's going on. This can give me clues on mold, but also if they've got a high level of Clostridia, because there is no place for high levels of this in the body. So, from one we can find out all of this. Then we can also find out really important things like, do they have high levels of oxalates that could be contributing to what's going on? I spoke earlier about the little girl who her brain was literally on fire. She had really high levels of quinolinic. It goes up to 6.7. Hers was, I think, 8 or 9 or something really, really high. And then, looking at things like dopamine and serotonin, especially if your child is hyperactive, ADHD, we're trying to see, look, what's going on with this metabolism of the neurotransmitters. So, very, very powerful stuff. We can learn what's going on with them utilizing their proteins. I might have to touch this. And then also, oh, it's not playing nicely. Hold on. Also, their nutritional markers. So it does give us some ideas on B12, B6, riboflavin, some really important, which is B2, really important nutritional markers, and these indicators of detoxification. This is one of the most important parts of this test. The whole test is pretty important, really. But this glutathione and understanding is the pyoglutamic really through the roof high. What that can indicate is that their little body is either chewing up a lot of glutathione, which is their body's master antioxidant, or they're struggling to make it. So very, very powerful. Nutrigenomics. So this is a study of how our genes interact with our food. Very new area of science. So it's only been around since 1990. So it's not medical genetics, where, we say, look, you may have been through testing where they assess for chromosomal abnormalities, Fragile X, etc. What this is doing is looking to say, look, as far as how you utilize your vitamins, for instance, how you basically methylate and make healthy cells, what's going on for your child's genes. Because at the end of the day, their diet, even the season, toxin exposures, exercise, their gut, drugs they take, medicines, um, their mood, it all has this what we call epigenetic modification and modulation, and it changes. So the role in their health. So what we want to be doing is making sure that if your child has specific um, genetics for certain health things going on, we want to be able to have them turned off or slowed down or sped up, depending on how we want that enzyme to work. We all have a variation of our gene every 300 genes. So they're called single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs, and they're there. Otherwise, you and I would look exactly the same and be the same. But what it does is these SNPs is basically their body's impact to nutrients and stresses and toxins and heavy metals and mold and all the things differently to you and I. Now, we need to remember that they're growing up in an environment which is more toxic than we grew up in, and that our grandparents and our ancestors grew up in. So, what we're finding is that kids these days, we are having some of these genes, the MTHFR, the catecholamine, methyltransferase, PON1, and the glutathione genes, probably doesn't mean much to you, but these genes can play a really big impact in neurological health and autism. There's some good studies on it. So there are, when you look at, you probably heard of MTHFR, there are a lot of different SNPs for MTHFR. What they've found is the C677T has more susceptibility to autism. And basically what that means is ability to make and utilize folate. So what we've got to try and work through for your kiddos is what's going on for them. And for John, this little boy, he was 4, he got diagnosed with autism, maybe a year or so before I was working with him. He also had joint problems and autoimmune juvenile arthritis. And what happened was we found out that he had a particular genetic challenge with B12. And so he got onto the right form of B12 for him and his little body. And his parents said a lot of his symptom severity reduced and many of his symptoms went away, which, again, blows my mind. As long as he stays on that particular form of B12 for his life, given his genetics, I'm hoping that it really helps him. So this looks a bit complicated. Oops, I can't zoom in for some reason. That's all right. Basically, methylation. So what we've got is we've got this factory where we eat and make folate. That MTHFR gene I just spoke about is here. So if you've got a reduced capacity because of a genetic polymorphism, if your child can't bring in the folate into this methionine cycle, then as a result, the whole glutathione, the whole detox kind of pathway is down here. And also how they make energy is here. So it doesn't mean we give the child a whole lot of folate. Absolutely not. I don't think I have ever given a child folate in the first instance, because if this methionine synthase is blocked, then mental health goes down the toilet. We see, and I'm dealing with children who have got very aggressive, dysregulated emotional behaviors. So it would be negligent of me to put more folate in unless I make sure that I call it the garage door. The garage door is up and their mental health is optimal. So I don't want you to rush off and go, oh my God, my kid's got this, load them up, because no, it could make them worse. So when you are working with someone who understands this, what they do is they take your story but also take the genetics and any other testing that's been done to really work through, okay, well, where does it look like there's blocks? If, like glutathione's here, so like I said, we can test for glutathione on that organic acid urine test. If the kid is exposed to a lot of toxins, and like I said, all children do not have the sophisticated detox capacity that you and I have, they may be chewing a hell of a lot up. So the question is, can they make enough to deal with the onslaught of what they're faced with in this very modern world? Um, so it looks complicated, but look, I get it. I understand it. Um, the other things that I find a lot of the children have is some what's called glutathione deletion genes. So their ability to basically recycle glutathione is not optimal. And so we've got to really work through how do we support this, especially when they're picky with their nutrition. If they eat well, it's much easier, that's for sure. I do have a webinar on nutrigenomics called Unlocking Health and Introduction to Nutrigenomics. So you can go in there and learn lots more. Covers, like when you do the Smart DNA Advanced Pathways test, it covers 300 genes. So it's a lot. You're going through all of this. I'm not expecting you to understand it. What you need is someone like me to be able to say, right, what does this mean? So that's at GST M1 that was referenced in one of the articles that I spoke about earlier. You can see here there's vitamin sections, there's the methylation section, and this is where I always start. I always glance over things like vitamins and histamine and stuff like that. But if I'm working with a child with autism and or ADHD or other neurological things going on, we always start with optimizing methylation, which is that diagram that I showed you before. Immune dysregulation and autoimmunity. I don't see it all the time. Autoimmunity, I will say I see it sometimes, but I definitely see immune dysregulation. So I'm seeing a lot of allergies, a lot of drippy noses, a lot of eczema, a lot of skin conditions, a lot of asthma, and even some children I've referred on to pediatricians because I've suspected that they got streptococcal infections in their brain. So that's what PANS and PANDAS is, where there's neuropsychotic symptoms. And often, you know, these children who they were fine, they were healthy and neurotypical, and then all of a sudden one day they, you know, got sick. Some have had COVID, some have had other things going on, and then all of a sudden they're not fine. So I do have some pediatricians who do work in this space, so I refer them on. And, you know, some of these kids get great results because, again, it's neuroinflammation. Little girl I've been working with, I'd say now for probably a couple of years, maybe 18 months. So she was exposed to mold, she was living on a farm. So dealing with all of those toxins, her eczema has reduced by a lot, 95%, probably more, 98%. She was head to toe, like all on her face, everywhere. And now it's just on her ankles. And her mood has improved so much. So friends, family, like, wow, she's like a different child, so happy. And I think it's because her immune system is now less overreactive, which is amazing. Food sensitivities and inflammation. So you may have done IgE food tests, so allergies. So that's where there's an immediate reaction to food. Often people have not done an IgG food test. I can run that for you. What that does is that gives us ideas is there a delayed immune response? So it's not like you need an EpiPen kind of allergy. What it is it's an intolerance that if a child has a particular food in a couple of days, their immune system can react. What we find is that for some children, taking out certain foods can impact their mood and behavior and focus. And there definitely is a role for trialing elimination diets, for trialing taking out things like gluten and dairy and personalized nutrition. But the thing is, it can be hard. If you're already only dealing with a handful of foods and your child's very picky, then removing food groups can be very challenging and very significant. So often we don't always start there. But what we do know is that for some children, gluten and dairy can really cause neural inflammation. So that might be something you may want to trial. Thomas, so his concentration improved at school and also that drippy nose went away. So what did we do? We took out gluten for him. He was referred to me by a dentist because he had cavities, and mum and dad were saying, look, we don't know why. He seems to be eating okay. I did an oral microbiome swab and the organic acid urine test. And what it came back was with, yep, there were a lot of things going on in the mouth, not enough good bacteria in the mouth, plus yeast in the body, which was making him crave the milk, but also all the refined foods. And since we've taken those out, it was quick. I would say it was 3 months or 4 months. Went back for the dental check and they called in another dentist to double check because there were no cavities. And, with the little kids, how they get the brown marks. Amazing, fascinating. So if you need help, so I've got workshops. I'll send you a link or show you a link in a minute, or you can work with me one-on-one. So you can message me. So you book online and you can just message me with all your kiddos' testing results if they've done certain testing. If you wanted to just say, look, yep, I'll dive in, learn about picky eating, learn about going gluten-free, learn about going dairy-free, maybe do a sugar detox, or maybe learn just about optimizing your family's nutrition. There's all these workshops. They're at a lower price point. They're easy to watch. You get recipes with them. You can start today. If you wanted to, I've got that in twice. If you want to work with me one-on-one, you book an appointment, you complete the intake forms, provide me, like I said, with copies of any testing, and then I'll go in the 90-minute consultation with you and ask lots and lots of questions on your child's health and family history, going back to your pregnancy, and even maybe a little bit before that. And so what I'm trying to do is join dots. And if we need to, we can order functional tests. We may just start with some recommendations and you may just start trying some things. So at the appointments, you get thorough explanation of any test results if you do them, nutrition advice if you need recipes, lifestyle suggestions, so things to help with sleep and other things. If we need to utilize supplements, I only use the best quality because obviously with children, we don't want to be putting in things that have lots of fillers and other rubbish in it. And if you need further testing. So that's it for today. If you want to, like I said, watch a nutrition workshop, you can do that right now. If you say, look, yeah, I want to learn more, or you're most welcome to book an appointment. So that's it for now. I hope that's been helpful. And if in doubt, you are also welcome to book a discovery call.